Greetings, friends. My name is Pavel Steinmach, and I'm glad to present for you the new episode of our daily wrap-up series. Today, Christians living according to the Julian calendar celebrate Christmas Eve. It may seem strange to residents of Europe and America, but we celebrate the New Year first, and only then Christmas. By the way, if you look at the map, almost all countries where the birth of Christ is celebrated in January were once part of the USSR or the Russian Empire. And this is where the answer to the question of why we are not like the rest of the world lies. The reason for everything is the influence of Moscow. During the Soviet occupation, the communist authorities tried to completely suppress religion in the USSR or distort it as much as possible. However, centuries of traditions and faith in God, not a leader, preserved all traditions. And in time, I hope Ukraine, like the whole world, will celebrate Christmas on December 25th. But today I would like to talk about another aspect of Christmas – military. After all, in the Ukrainian information space, Putin's decree on the so-called Christmas truce is being discussed for the second day. Why so-called? Because no Ukrainian believes in this, and now I will try to explain why. Let's start with the fact that the first to speak about the truce was the Moscow Patriarch Kirill, who previously blessed the Russian military for the war and called them heroes. He called the people who shot civilians in Bucha and Irpin heroes. The heroes are the people who launch missiles at critical infrastructure and leave small children and old people without heat and light in winter. And this person was the first to speak about a mutual ceasefire. After Kirill's statement was not accepted in Ukraine, Putin himself joined in. He even issued a decree on the ceasefire for 36 hours. Does anyone believe that it will really happen?
Of course, this is purely a propaganda gesture and nothing else. Russia is trying in every possible way temporarily reduce the intensity of battles and the intensity of attacks on its logical centers in order to get time to carry out additional mobilization, build large-scale fortification in the occupied territories and regroup the army. This could not be done by one or another military means. Therefore, standard information tricks were used. In addition, Russia wants to show supposedly humanistic approaches in the war and still try to convince the Europeans so they that start putting pressure on us. Their task is the same: an immediate negotiation table, the adoption of the Russian ultimatum, and new line of division. This is a cynical meaning of Putin's instruction for a temporary ceasefire. Banal trick. There is not the slightest desire to end the war in this. Moreover, let me remind you that only Russia attacks civilian objects with missiles and drones, including places of religious rites, and does that precisely on Christmas holidays. Therefore, once again, there is no need to respond to the deliberately manipulative initiatives of the leadership of the Russian Federation.
It is interesting that after such a decree, the head of the DPR terrorist organization, Denis Pushilin, whom Putin avoided with some kind of an order a month ago, declared that he would not comply with it. That is, a person under Putin's command simply does not follow his orders, publicly and officially. So maybe the principle everyone does what he wants has been in the Russian army for a long time, and that is why private armies are created there, so that there is at least some kind of subordination. However, I digress and would like to return to the so-called truce. I would like to remind you that representatives of the Kremlin, in one form or another, have been trying to impose a truce since the beginning of autumn, when our troops began to liberate Kharkiv region, and Putin announced demobilization. That is, on the one hand, various people began to talk about a tactical pause, and on the other hand, they began to call people to the army. According to official information, 300,000. According to unofficial information, about 1 million. Can you guess why? Probably in order for there to be a truce. Of course not. I'm more than sure that in order to train the mobilized and hit Ukraine with new forces. And now, when Russia is losing its occupied territories of Ukraine, of course they want an armistice. We will not stop until the Ukrainians cross the border in 1991. Let me remind you that 85% of Ukrainians are against any territorial concessions to the end of the war. Russia will now try to use Christmas to show Ukrainians in a negative light. I am sure that now pro-Russian politicians and mass media in the West will begin to tell that we are such antichrists who do not allow people to celebrate the holiday in peace. However, I will simply remind you of the speech of the representative of Russia at the UN in April 2022, a few days before Easter, the biggest holiday of Christians.
Не буду скрывать, что
I will not hide the fact that calls for peace and ceasefire sound very false and insincere in these conditions, which in practice mean only a desire to give Kiev nationalists and radicals a respite so that they can regroup and receive new batches of drones, ATGMs and pen pads, and along the way also arrange new inhuman provocation and launch new fakes about the actions of Russian soldiers.
As we say, the thieves' hat is burning. After all, yesterday the Deputy Prime Minister for Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories, Irina Vereshchuk, and earlier the international intelligence community Inform Napalm reported that there is a high probability that several Orthodox churches in Donetsk and other settlements in the occupied territories may be mined and blown up during the festive morning services on January the 7th. This will be done in order to film propaganda stories for the Russian domestic audience and thus initiate an informational pretext for a new wave of mobilization in Russia. At the places where the churches were blown up, in the plots for propaganda, they plan to remove fragments of HIMARS brought from other places of explosions. And our intelligence knew that the Russians were preparing it back in December. Here is a recording of the broadcast for December 16th.
There is information that the troops of the Russian army were instructed to collect fragments of foreign, that is not Soviet, Western-style ammunition. We are talking about 155 caliber, all ammunition that can show Ukraine's involvement in the shelling of Donetsk. These remnants of ammunition are brought to Donetsk, and then we will see staged films and stories about alleged shelling of peaceful infrastructure.
So, in the end, I will simply draw a few conclusions. If Moscow sincerely wanted a Christmas truce, it would have forward with an initiative in advance and not a day before the announced start. Putin's instructions to Shoigu should not be taken seriously. All this already happened when the storming and shelling of Azovstal continued, even after Putin's similar order to Shoigu to stop the attacks on the Mariupol garrison. The Russian invasion force in Ukraine is no longer a single disciplined and centrally controlled body, and therefore no one can guarantee that Shoigu's order will be carried out. The gangs formed by Prigozhin and Kadyrov can absolutely disregard any decision of the Russian General Staff and Ministry of Defense. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Gundyaev, has no moral right to act as a peacemaker and an authority in Orthodoxy, being the inspirer and propagandist of Russian aggression. The appeal to Christmas on January the 6th, the 7th, is a deliberate provocation by Russian Orthodox Church, which opposes Ukrainian Orthodoxy and its movement to postpone the celebration of this Christian holiday to December 25th. If Russia believes that it is at war with NATO, then it should consider that the absolute majority of NATO countries celebrate Christmas in a new style on December 25th. It was on the day before Christmas Eve in the Georgian style that Russia carried out a terrorist attack in the center of Kherson, killing 7 people and injuring 58. As before, Moscow begins to talk about peace only when it seeks to deceive, resort to provocations or recuperate so that later it can continue the aggression. And while the Kremlin is trying to get at least some sort of truce, Russian troops continue their offensive on Bakhmut, to the Ukrainian fortress in Donbas, which they have been unsuccessfully trying to capture since May. Currently, the Russians are attacking the city from 3 directions at once. The Russians still have an advantage there in terms of artillery, ammunition and manpower, but they can't do anything with it.
Хочу сьогодні відзначити наших бійців.
I would like to praise our warriors in the Bakhmut direction, in particular the special units of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine Shaman, as well as the border guards of the Luhansk detachment, who together with the fighters of the International Legion of Defense of Ukraine inflict numerous losses to the enemy and drive the occupants out of their positions on the outskirts of Bakhmut. This is a good result and I am grateful for it. Each such result and each day of the enemy's failures in the Bakhmut direction and in Donbas in general is a significant weakening of the aggressor state. The occupants have been postponing the date when they expect to capture the entire Donbas for 6 months. They have been expecting to do it by the new year, and our defenders are demonstrating success again. The invaders are constantly increasing their forces in the Donetsk region. They are doing it now as well. And every such day with our success in a new proof of the insanity of the very idea to attack Ukraine. If only such news from the front can return a sense of reality to everyone in Russia, we will have to ensure it much as possible.
What is the importance of this city for Ukraine? 2 important roads pass through Bakhmut, to Kostiantynivka and to Siversk. From the highway to Siversk, you can also turn to Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. but why this is for the Russians is not known for sure. For example, Reuters, referring to its source in the White House, reported that Prigozhin wanted to capture Bakhmut in order to control the salt and gypsum mines. There are signs that the obsession of Russia and PMC head Wagner of Bakhmut is due to monetary interest, a high-ranking official of the White House reported. Agency reminded that earlier the USA accused Russian mercenaries of exploiting natural resources in the Central African Republic, Mali, Sudan, and other places to help finance Moscow's war in Ukraine. Out of almost 50,000 Wagner mercenaries, lost more than 4,000 killed and 10,000 wounded, including more than 1,000 killed in the period from the end of November to the beginning of December, near Bakhmut, an American official said. Another option is that the Wagner PMC decided to prove to the Russian authorities that it has better, high-quality training than the regular Russian army. However, it is not possible. Moreover, now the leader of the Wagnerites, Prigozhin, has declared that every building in the city is a fortress, and the Ukrainians have built a line of defense every 10 meters. But we didn't build that much, we just know how to fight, unlike the Russians.
In their opinion, a breakthrough in the Bakhmut area will allow them to force our troops to retreat from Avdiivka and create a fairly high tension in the Ugledar area. There is the reason of activity of hostilities in this direction from a military point of view, according to the Russian leadership. But early, when the Russians were in Izum, such an offensive made sense. Then today, the advance in the Bakhmut region is not of such fundamental importance for the Russian, and it's unlikely to achieve their goals. But there is also a political background, where they say that they must show at least some kind of victory.
As of today, Bakhmut has been destroyed by more than 60%, reported the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, Pavlo Kirilenko. About 8,700 people remain in the city. People are constantly dying due to regular shelling. For example, 2 women who are not related to the military died on Wednesday. This is liberation in Russian. This year, Ukraine will receive weapons from its allies, which it failed to obtain in 2022, Minister of Foreign Affairs Dmytro Kuleba wrote on his Facebook. The first week of 2023 already proves this. Wheeled tanks and armored vehicles from France, Bradley and Marder armored personal carriers from the USA and Germany, an additional German Patriot battery, ammunition and much more. And today the US is yet to announce a new aid package. According to Reuters, we will receive about $3 billion in aid. Thanks to this hard work and the heroism of the armed forces of Ukraine and all the defense forces of Ukraine, the president's diplomatic team managed to convince the allies. The time of the weapons taboo was past. We are entering a decisive phase. There can be only one goal, the victory of Ukraine. This is the only way to ensure lasting and just peace and security in Europe.
President Zelensky is conducting a real diplomatic marathon this week, holding talks with 3 or 4 leaders every day. Some decisions about the supply of weapons are made directly during the talks. Some will be approved based on their results. It was the president's idea to start the diplomatic new year without a rush, super intensively and as objectively as possible. And this work gives concrete results. Dmytro Kuleba, the Minister of Foreign Relations of Ukraine.
Indeed, both sides are really starved of ammunition and are about to transition from an artillery war to something else. In particular, bringing aviation back into action and making the war more mobile again. Obviously, for this purpose our allies give us light-wheeled tanks, armored personal carriers, but they do not forget about artillery shells too. And we see that the statements of the leaders of countries increasingly indicate that they are ready to give us offensive weapons too. That is, the weapons that we were told clearly about in 2022 that we would not be given, suddenly in official announcements. Therefore, we hope to get tanks, planes and missiles.
We will continue to speak with the Ukrainians about what they need for the next phase of their self-defense, and we will continue working with our international partners about ensuring that we provide that. Tanks might well be part of that. Where they come from, which allies provide them, is something that, of course, we are working on in coordination with each other. James Cleverly, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of UK.
So, judging by the declared and announced deliveries from the allies, we may soon receive even more offensive weapons. Tanks, I think, are a matter of the near future. It seems that our allies have no desire to allow Russia to drag out the war. Russia is being defeated, and it has less and less time left. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for for future videos. Subscribe to UATV English and goodbye.